Conversations. I am Red Alert.
I'm Real Insight.
Salute.
What's up, brother?
So what we drinking on today?
Oh man, we are drinking on Gentleman Jack. Gentleman Jack Daniels. I tell you, it's a go-to, especially when I'm out and about. So you have the black label, you have Gentleman Jack, and then you have that single barrel. And that single barrel has a rye. You have different ones there. And we featured that one before, but I tell you, this Gentleman Jack is reasonably priced. And this one you can drink it straight, or you can mix it. So I won't beat you up for mixing this one. It's okay, but if you went to the next level, that single barrel, I would say not. It's sweet, similar to the black label, but it's a little smoother than that. All right. So it's you know what, it's a go-to. You know, we have a lot of this stuff at home, as you could see in the background. So going out, not a cheap guy, but I don't like spending a lot of money on libations like this when I'm out. And so this is one of the few that I go to that's good, that I can drink straight, that won't break the pocket.
Now, is Gentleman Jack the person that Uncle Nearest was supposed to have demonstrated or showed the
Jack Daniels is.
Jack Daniels. Jack
So
Daniels.
this is just the name of the middle one, but it's referring to Jack.
So Jack Daniels is the person that was trained and educated by Nearest Green.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. And so I think we featured that one time, but we have several we could do on him, on that brand as well. But no, this is solid. This is solid. This is meat and potatoes right here. You know, you can drink it straight or you can mix it, and it's good to go, especially when you're out and about and you're at a spot. Yeah, give me, what do you want to drink? Yeah, let me get that Gentleman Jack on the rocks off straight.
All right, well, it ain't bad straight.
All right.
Thank you, Gentleman Jack.
All right, man.
Let's do it. So, it's Black History Month, and got to thinking about Black music, Black musical contributions.
Yep.
And one of my favorite genres of music, period, is jazz.
Yeah.
But it's also one of the more complex ones.
Yeah.
I don't think that it gets its fair share of airplay nowadays, and I don't think that I think its heyday is far gone. At one point in time, jazz was the equivalent of what hip hop is to music overall.
Right.
And it was the party music at one point in time, but now it's kind of lost that sort of cash, that sort of status in society. Yeah. But it's still a mainstay. It's still a viable art form.
Yeah.
But I guess to kind of set the stage.
Yeah.
Jazz can incorporate so many different things and have so many different meanings to people. When you think of jazz and jazz music, how do you define it? How do you describe jazz?
You know, my personal definition of jazz music is really complete improvisation. Expressing feelings within the instrument itself. So whether it's a trumpet or trombone or saxophone, whatever it may be, getting that feeling of what you're trying to express with that musical instrument. And that's very difficult to do in that genre. And so I believe some of the reasons why it's not as popular, because it's an acquired taste. You don't have usually any words with it, so it's just instruments, and it's a certain flow to it as well. And it does put you in a certain kind of mood, right? So I believe it's a mature sound that you have to be somewhat mature to be able to appreciate and understand.
Yeah. When I think of rap music, I think of rhythm and poetry. When I think of rock music, I think of raucous, loud music. When I think of pop music, I think of music that's popular for the times. That can change over time, but that's pop music. When I think of classical music, I think of highly trained musicians who are playing a piece, and they do not deviate outside the lines of the composition, but they're highly trained, highly technical, and they focus on the composition itself. So classical music is all about the composition. Jazz is highly trained people who are so skilled in their instrument that they can deviate and they go off and they improvise, like you said. It is, to me, it's the highest form of musical playing, because these guys are technically, they're right there at the top. But they're taking that expertise and now they're making it purely an individual expression of how they feel the music should be played within the piece. I like to, when I think about jazz though, and I think about a great jazz piece, I think about being like at a dinner party.
Hmm.
Think of a long table where everybody's vibing at the table, but you
Hmm.
can't necessarily be engaged in the conversation at the one end of the table.
Hmm.
But you're having a conversation with the person across you or right next to you.
Hmm.
That's like listening to the solos. But
Hmm.
there's this overall conversation that's taking place, and that is kind of the composition itself.
Yeah.
Now you can veer off and go have a conversation with somebody down the line, and that's again, those are the improvisations that take place.
Yeah.
But overall, the song itself or the jazz piece itself is that
Hmm.
table, it's that setting, it's that, that meeting that you have, and the
Yeah.
improvisation are the different conversations that you're having within that meeting.
No, that's good. And I think the only area I may somewhat disagree with you as far as jazz being highly trained, I would say more highly talented than highly trained because of the improvisation of it and then how it started. When you look at um, Louis Armstrong
Hmm.
back in 1910 or what have you, a lot of that was self-trained
Hmm.
and just playing by ear. And then, some training after that to be able to compose music and what have you. But a lot of jazz, I'm not taking anything, but I'm
Hmm.
saying a lot of the jazz music, which I think it's so brilliant, it is from the talent and just the improvisation of the mind being able to think on the spot to play whatever comes to mind to make that particular song that they want to make.
But talent don't necessarily mean untrained, and training doesn't necessarily mean talent.
No.
What I'm saying though is that they know that instrument so well that they can get it to play at the extremes or at the most bass parts, and they understand music at a very high level.
Yeah.
Don't necessarily mean that they're classically trained,
Right.
right? But they can play. They can probably play
Sure.
classic material,
Yeah.
but that doesn't necessarily mean that they have gone to the Juilliards or
Exactly. And that's my point.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So,
That's what I thought you were saying.
okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, no, and I think that, the analogy that I would try to make here is I would say jazz music is more like the kids playing basketball at Rucker Park in New York or at the Drew in
Hmm.
LA versus maybe a formal school. And when they come to play each other, I mean, there's a different dynamic there
Hmm.
because you have a street ball dynamic against maybe a system.
And I like that because one of the things that I thought about who to me is kind of the epitome of the jazz musician
Mhm.
would be like Kobe Bryant.
Mm, mm,
Kobe is ain't nobody technically as good as Kobe is just like the man when it comes to just form technical, just don't knowing how to do moves.
yeah.
But you put him in any environment,
Hmm.
Kobe's going to excel.
Yeah.
He's that good.
Yeah.
He can improvise on the go, but he has his but he's trained to with footwork and all that kind of stuff where he can hit shots where he want to hit. That
Yeah.
to me, he's a jazz player
Yeah.
right there.
Yeah. So he had the talent
Hmm.
and then he honed that skill with the hard work,
Yep.
with the practice that he put in to make those difficult
And
shots.
now he's able to improvise when he needs to.
Yeah.
You can put Michael Jordan in there, Doc, whoever else you want to. That's jazz. That's jazz in motion
Yeah.
from a basketball perspective.
Okay.
So jazz, I mean, it's been around for a long time.
Hmm.
Um, and let's just kind of help others to get a sense of where this thing came from. So
Hmm.
you're a New Orleans guy.
Hmm.
Jazz started in your hometown.
Yep.
Um, give me a sense of when it started and how it started, because I think there was an offshoot of that started in my hometown of Chicago a little bit later, but
Hmm.
I'll let you start first.
Yeah. I mean, it's Louis Armstrong was really, huge with that. And he had a mentor, King Oliver, um, back really in the early 1900s. So you had the New Orleans, you had the Dixie Jazz in 1910 and 20s. Quickly 30s and 40s, you had the swing bands and then
Hmm.
bebop after that in the 40s, 50s, and you had that cool jazz in the 50s. Um, and then, hard bop, model jazz, free jazz, jazz fusion, then smooth jazz, and all of that kind of overlapped each other in the 70s, 80s, and 90s to the present. And then you have the contemporary jazz that implements hip hop and all the other different elements that we have today in music.
Yeah, and you can go back as far as the late 1800s, though, with guys like Scott Joplin, W.C. Handy
Yeah.
and those guys, I think as the foundation
Right.
for what ended up becoming New Orleans jazz. And then I think not too far after New Orleans jazz kind of had its footing, Louis Armstrong being kind of the focal point, comes to Chicago and makes Chicago jazz a thing. It kind of sets some foundations in Chicago.
Yeah.
And then when you said the swing and the big band era, I think that's kind of when jazz became, that was pop music
back then,
right? That was the music that they went out and listened to. That's the music that they danced to. That was the music that was recorded and played, and that was really pop music at that point in time.
And it really fit with the fashion at that time too.
Oh man.
And how they dressed to go to these events, right? And so when you went to listen to jazz music back then, the Miles Davises and those in that era, I mean, you wore suit and tie, and ladies with nice dresses on.
But go before the Miles Davis era. You're talking the 40s when you had the Cab Callaways, Duke Ellingtons, and you think about how sharp them dudes were, those people were, the ladies were dressing nice with the hats and the heels.
Right.
Man, it is a big overlap between the music, the environment, and the way people came out for that.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about it in one of the episodes as far as the fashion influence in music and how they intertwine together. But, a little bit more about the elements of New Orleans jazz, and you're right, it was influenced by blues and ragtime spirituals as well, about the Negro spirituals and marching band music. And the instrument that usually led that, my favorite instrument, is the trumpet.
Trumpet, yep.
And even the clarinet too. The clarinet is a big part of New Orleans music. You hear it in the Mardi Gras music that we have, and songs like When Saints Go Marching In, what have you. Clarinet is a big part of that. Trombone is a big part of that also. And our music plays, New Orleans music plays a big part of our culture, from, as I just said, Mardi Gras, but also in funerals, and so we have a second line. That's where that second line term comes from. So with a jazz funeral, you sing the dirge going there. You kind of waltz going and singing a slow song, but you have the jazz band there playing as you walk into the funeral. I'm sorry, to the church or what have you. You have the service, but you come out dancing to a second line, and it's almost like a parade. And it is a parade where they playing, Ola Liza and all these different type of songs at a joyful thing, because now that person's with the Lord, and you're celebrating the life of that person, and not mourning over the death. So you mourn, yes, weeping and endure for the night, but joy comes in the morning when you come out of that, if you're a person of faith and believe where they are.
That's always been an amazing thing to see. Never really witnessed one in person. Don't necessarily know if I want to because of the moment that's taking place, but it does look like it's a thing to see.
Man, but it happens so often. I remember just coming up as a kid there on Sunday. You get caught in a parade, because a parade can pop up just at any time, or the Indians come out and people are following them. But also these funerals pop up. So you got a 15-minute ride home. Sometimes that take 2 hours, and we'll just pull over sometime and just join the parade and just walk with them, depending on what it is, because what else you going to do? Because the streets are blocked off and you can't go anywhere. So that's just how it is down there. But it's something you get used to, and it's just part of the culture. But jazz in itself is extremely important to the city. When you talk about jazz, you got to include music, the culture, the people, the food, all of that together is a culture, but jazz is the center point of that.
Yep. And I think early on there were the periods in the style of jazz were pretty distinct. You had already mentioned we got New Orleans jazz in Chicago, swing, the big band era, bop, cool jazz. It was there weren't a whole lot of overlap in those times. I'm pretty sure that they were hard bop and stuff, that there were artists who were doing a little bit of both at those times, but predominantly they were pretty straightforward eras. But the one that I want to spend a little bit of time on though is right after cool jazz. Miles Davis kind of brought that in. You got into this free jazz era, which led into, it just kept getting freer, for lack of a better term. You went from free jazz to what I'll call spiritual jazz. That's actually a term, but that's when Alice Coltrane started doing a thing. Pharoah Sanders and all those who were um, offshoots of Coltrane, who was an offshoot of Miles Davis, started to do their thing. But then they went into fusion, and fusion, and it's such a amalgamation of terms and styles. It's just not just the jazz rock, but you had jazz funk, you had soul jazz, you had a whole lot of stuff come out of that. And I would argue and say too that fusion brought on smooth jazz too. It really, so you got jazz funk, you got jazz rock, you got you had disco jazz and all that kind of stuff. Jazz pop is really just smooth jazz.
Yeah, I would say out of all the eras, fusion is my least favorite. The electronic melodies and the electronic feel to that wasn't the jazz that I was traditionally grew to love. It just was so different. But at the same time, I do appreciate it. And that's why Miles is at the top of my favorite. You talk about him coming in, with hard bop and really cool jazz before then in the early 50s or somewhere like that. But he was able to adjust
and push
to every single different type of jazz all the way through fusion. He was in the 80s, and so that's not easy to do. And you look who else followed him there. There was very few that was able to be that prominent in each era and stand out like that.
The only, I mean, everybody else who was able to stand out played with him.
So, he brought him along.
Right, he brought him along.
Yeah. So, no, these different eras here, and I tell you, I do still listen to jazz, and I can't remember when it just caught my eye, but I tell you, some of the more contemporary folks brought me back. So you may disagree with this person, but Joe Sample was pivotal to me. Rest his soul. He was a pianist, but I would say he was more under the contemporary jazz umbrella. All right, that had all the other elements in there. He was able to put smooth melodies, smooth sounds with it that can bring someone that's not into jazz. Oh, I like that. That sounds good. But he wasn't, what's the term you used before? Sappy. He wasn't sappy. And you have some artists that are, and I won't mention because I don't want to be disrespectful, but just went too far over. But Sample was able to make me go back and appreciate.
But going back to one of the things that we said jazz was, and that was the art of improvisation, right? It's you have some structure, but it's a lot more improvisation on top of that. What the foundation of that particular song might be, whether it's pop, whether it's whatever, chamber music, whatever, there's still improvisation, and that's what makes it jazz. So there's a flavor for jazz for everybody. Now you kind of said that Joe Sample brought you in. I'll tell you what brought me to jazz. When I was a preteen, we had a buddy in the neighborhood whose dad had a ridiculous record collection. And that dude was a hard bop head. I mean, you go to to their house and play, and Mr. Bolly had nothing but hard, just the nastiest jazz playing, right? And all I could think about back when I was a kid, like all he played is that bibbidi bop bibbidi boop music, right? I had no concept of it, right? That's what it sounded like to me, bibbidi bop bibbidi boop. Fast forward a couple of years, I'm probably like a freshman in high school, and hip hop is becoming a thing. And part of hip hop was just taking different elements of different songs, and you trying to learn how to scratch and all this kind of stuff. So I went to my grandfather's house, my grandparents' house, and started raiding their record collection like most kids do back in the day. And he gave me a couple of records. One was a BB King album that he said he wanted more, and another one was a John Coltrane album. So I take these albums home. It was probably like 4 or 5 of them, and I'm trying to find different parts of the record to scratch. Couldn't find nothing on BB King. Put this John Coltrane bibbidi bop bibbidi boop on. Couldn't find anything. I'm looking for horn stabs or whatever that I could try to learn how to scratch on. But then I kept like wait a minute, hold on.
Right.
I play a little section. I no, and I remember the John Coltrane Blue Train, and I remember the album cover and everything. It was blue,
Yeah.
and I was so struck by just this music that commanded me almost. No, you listen to this. This ain't you might find some stuff to play around with and cut and scratch, blah blah blah,
Yeah.
whatever. But it made me listen.
Right.
I started the record over and turned the lights off. Me and my brother listened to that album like almost all night.
Yeah.
And that was then, and seriously, jazz has always been that man. It just drew my attention and drew me in, and kind of been the foundation of other styles of music that I end up pursuing and liking after that.
But I would say generation today, it'd be, I think it's much harder for them to appreciate jazz. And even with us, not as hard as now, but much harder now because there are all these other different genres of music. They grew up in hip hop and soul and pop is all around them. For jazz, they got to get out of that and go seek it. And like you say, the platform for jazz music is not there like all other music. But if you go back into the, especially the foundation years of the 20s, 30s, and 40s, that was pretty much it.
Yeah.
So that's the music you listen to. You didn't have hip hop per se, or soul and R&B and all this other stuff to pull your attention away. That's what you listen to. And so to me, back then, having that foundation and that's what they listened to, it was much easier to gravitate to that great type of music because that's what they had.
And for me,
Mama cooked beans, you on your beans.
For me, it was early hip hop. It had its structure. It had its that set beat. House music had a structure, had a set beat. R&B, so everything had a structure and a set beat, and it had a rhythm, and it had sections that did X and sections that did Y and so forth. Right. But jazz, for me, it had that structure, it had that set rhythm, but then it would always hit you with something that you didn't expect, an improvisation piece. It always made it like, oh, that's interesting. It was like the musician was having a conversation with me. Right. And I got to be a part of that conversation. Then I can be a part of the other end of the table and all that kind of stuff.
Right. And from the improvisation, you can tell a difference in a player or a trumpet player. I like the trumpet. That's my favorite instrument to listen to. I'm a drummer by trade, by the way.
Okay.
I play a little drum set, but anyway. But I appreciate the sound of a trumpet and the complexities of the trumpet anyway. But my point is that I know the difference in Roy Hargrove and Miles Davis and Wynton Marsalis, and Louis Armstrong or Terrence Blanchard, Kermit Ruffins. I can tell a difference. If you put one on and put the other on, they're blowing that same horn, but the personality of who they are come out. And I'm talking about from the crispiness of the sound, the airiness of it, and the profound strength of it. I know the difference.
Like piano players.
Yeah.
When Bill Evans is playing a tune or Thelonious Monk, there's a difference. It could be the same piano, but their voice comes out distinctly in the way that they play. And it's to me, it's a beautiful thing.
It is
a
beautiful
thing. It is a beautiful thing.
It is a beautiful
and no two, you just named a whole bunch of trumpet players.
Yep.
None of them sound like they play the same piece, but none of them are gonna sound alike.
No.
And that's a beautiful thing. But just so your favorite instrument though, you said the trumpet.
Yeah.
What's your second favorite?
I would say the second favorite is probably the trombone.
Okay.
And we got shout out to Trombone Shorty and from New Orleans as well. That's similar to a trumpet almost, but it's distinctly different.
Yeah, for me it's would be saxophone first, and then piano. And you can go and I love bass players to the rhythm sections. But that a good saxophone player will draw me in. I do love my trumpet players.
Yeah,
Roy Hargrove was one of my absolute favorites.
See, but jab you a little bit. I mean, I think sax is kind of easy to listen to. You know, you got all the valves on there, and sax always sound good. I'm not saying the trumpet won't, but you know, the purists love the trumpet and the trombone. That saxophone, get into Kenny G and IG and all that.
That's exactly why you. That's exactly why you think the way you think.
And I get Coltrane, I get Bird back in there. I get them.
See, the problem with the trumpet though, for me, is that it's limited in terms of what it can do.
Charlie Parker, I was talking about him, but go ahead.
Yeah, but Charlie Parker, John Coltrane, Pharoah Sanders, they can take you so many different places with just that one particular instrument. That's what draws me in.
Yeah. I don't know. I think more people, I would say if you question 1,000 people, 80% of them say they like the saxophone better than they do the trumpet, I would say.
And I bet you 80% of them listen to smooth jazz too. But that's,
and I guess that's where I'm going with that too. That drives you into that. And there's a place for smooth jazz. But we talking about the pure.
There's a place for smooth jazz. Tell me, what's your favorite jazz style? And I know you listen to WJZ or whatever, in one of them smooth jazz stations back in the day. You was probably riding around.
Well, I think to protect me from being disrespectful, I think that contemporary jazz that implements everything in that cool jazz period. I appreciate that. And I go back to when Miles came in. I mean, because that was a pivotal period. Not saying they didn't have any trumpet players there, but he made it a big thing then. And so I like that period, and I do like that contemporary period that does bring in some hip hop elements to it, because that brings more people to jazz. I think when you could do that, because think about it. You think about the what is that? What's this instrument here?
The violin.
The violin, which is more of a classical instrument, but it can be implemented into jazz because it's almost like a bass on your chin. And that's one of my favorites too, the bass. But my point is that because of hip hop and because of the brilliance of these young people using those type of instruments in hip hop will open up jazz to these people. Yeah, and so that's why I like that stage as well, that age as well.
For me, cool jazz is probably the modal jazz. What on the same page. That's where I start. Mm-hmm. But when it transitioned to what I call spiritual jazz, incorporating those African elements and a lot of percussion but just ethnic elements into it as well. That's really like my sweet spot. But then right behind that though, I don't necessarily like I don't like jazz rock per se. But fusion, when it got to jazz funk and when it got to a place where they were doing a lot more with jazz with a little bit more R&B, that's one of my other kind of favorites. When I think about, so I think like Ramsey Lewis, and I think about groups in Chicago like they're popular in Chicago, like Charles Earland, Clarence Wheelan and the Enforcers. It was a style of jazz that was kind of R&B centered, but at the same time it was still a lot of jazz there too.
Yeah, I don't know if I put Ramsey Lewis in that fusion period. I mean, because
go to my point. Here's my point.
Okay.
Fusion was so broad.
Yeah,
soul jazz falls into fusion. Jazz rock, jazz funk, all that stuff it's by definition it's fusion, because you're fusing these elements together.
All right.
So I didn't like jazz rock, but what I did like was soul jazz.
Yeah.
What I did like was the jazz and R&B stuff. So like the CTI label, I like early George Benson stuff when he was on CTI.
Right.
But when it got to the place where it was jazz pop, and that wasn't my lane anymore.
Yeah. But Ramsey Lewis, maybe we need to talk about him one day specifically, because you think about his pivot and bringing jazz into, and you just said it, but bringing it into soul and R&B. And I think about his collaboration with Maurice Wright with Earth, Wind and Fire with Sun God. I mean, oh my God. I mean, that, like, who is that?
Hmm.
Who's Ramsey Lewis? Let me go back and listen to what he,
Yep.
so it brings you back to technically fusion and what he
Yeah.
did, and then it takes you back through the eras. At least it did with me. Because when Sun God is, if you hadn't heard Sun, you know it. But if you haven't heard Sun God of Earth, Wind and Fire, go look it up. That's a favorite song of mine. Let me digress a minute because I say that's one of the songs that does not have a legible word in it.
No.
That's a hit.
No.
It's all ba da ba ba ba.
Yeah. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba.
But and that's all they say through the whole song, but it's an amazing jam. They don't say one legible word up but other than ba da ba ba ba. Anyway, so Ramsey Lewis is in that thing doing his thing and just takes it to the next level. But it sparked my interest in who is he? Because I didn't really know much about him. I knew his name, but he wasn't someone I was focused on until it mixed with R&B, is what I'm saying.
And so again, I go back to one of my definitions. These jazz players are technically astute. They are at the top of their game in terms of knowing their instrument. And they can do pretty much anything. What makes jazz, though, its own thing is that improvisational piece where they step outside of the structure for a few minutes and just show you who they are, what they got, and what they can do.
Right.
Now, again, you don't see that in classical music.
No.
You don't necessarily see that in R&B, for the most part.
Right.
But in jazz, you get to see it.
And another thing about jazz, regardless of the era, that I think that's unique about it than any other sound. I mean, you listen to, and I love rock, soft rock. The Ambrosias of the world, played and all those kind of. I like them. But if you listen to their music right there, it sounds old. It sounds 80-ish, even though I appreciate it. But you can go listen to some jazz, some old, hard bop or whatever. It doesn't sound period to me. It just sounds like very good music. I know it's in a certain era, but it's not like, oh, that's old. No, that's the genre of that particular jazz music. You understand what I'm trying to say? Whereas regular music, even R&B would have it, man, that's a nice older song. That's nice, but it has an old feel to it. But man, when you play this jazz music, it takes me to the era, but it doesn't have an old feel to it. You play Louis Armstrong's song, it does not sound like it's 1910.
Right.
It has a unique, intangible way of holding its own without sounding like it's dated, to me, at least.
Now, I challenge you a little bit on that, where swing,
the fusion
big band, they because they were so popular for their time, they're tied to that time period. But for the most part, when you start looking at the small ensembles, the trios and the up to the quintets and all that kind of stuff, that time period just transcends. I mean, there's no time period for that. It just transcends time to me.
But you're right. But I think what makes it more dated with the swing, if you started adding the words, ain't got that thing that we don't have, do. But if you just play the music itself and take the words out, man, I bet you wouldn't be able to name the period as much. You might, because you understand, but the average person may not, especially you brought it today and put in the backdrop of some more contemporary lyrics or some music or what have you.
Now, let's not overlook the fact that there are great jazz vocalists as well. And so yes, we're talking about music, but we're also talking about folks who use their voice as an instrument.
Yeah.
First person that comes to mind, of course, is Ella Fitzgerald. And Sarah Vaughan and Dinah Washington, and we could continue to name Billy Eckstine. They're it's not just limited to the instruments. There's also folks who sang, who engage with that instrument, which was their voice too.
Which is a different kind of sound, the way they talk. They almost go with the instrument itself, right? So you got the jazz, which is improvised with a specific instrument, going all these different levels, what have you, and they tend to do that with their voice, with jazz kind of mimicking the instrument itself, which is not easy to do.
But again, they're technically astute. They are at the top of their game when it comes to being able to execute with their voice. And then they do it in a way that's not just like, again, opera is, here's the composition. You got to hit this note, this note, this note, this note, this note, this note, this note. Jazz is like, I can do that and I can do this.
Yes. you could do both. And we mentioned Louis Armstrong a few times, but a part of Louis Armstrong's act is that obviously he would talk, they loved the way he talked, and then he could play the trumpet, and then, he would sing. Oh, and the sang, he had that voice and they loved his voice. And he wasn't necessarily a great singer, but he had a sound. And his sound was so profound that you knew who he was, but it became appreciated. And so his unique talent and to be able to bridge the gap with how he sound to make that something that wants to be desired. Red Fox would try to sing like him when he did his show. Like with his raspy voice, he was thinking about Louis Armstrong. But go ahead.
I'm glad you kind of mentioned that because I use this term how they, technically is this, that, and the other. Let's not get it confused because you mentioned it earlier. It's like being at the Rucker Park. They knew how to use their voice to get what they needed to get out. That's right. That don't mean that they were Luther Vandross in terms of how they sang, but they could use their voice in a way that they got the point across with the particular song that they were singing.
Right. And now that I'm thinking about it, and staying on the Louis Armstrong with his voice, he had obviously wasn't singing R&B, but he had the raspiness in his voice. And then, that's my favorite style of singing voice that I like, I appreciate and like to hear. And so you got him, and I'm just going to skip all the way up. We talked to him before, but then you got Junior from Your Dales, who influenced Teddy Pendergrass, one of my favorite in those type of voices. You have others that sing like that as well, getting to more modern today. But my point is, we could really trace that back to Louis Armstrong. If you really think about it, the style of voice that he had. And then you get to Junior, who was like that, and Teddy, who was like that, and then others who with those voices. That origin goes back to the original jazz.
It makes me wonder, though, could a Teddy Pendergrass ever sing a jazz song? Could Marvin Jr. sing a jazz song?
I think so.
Now,
I think so.
When I think like Shaka Khan, one of my favorites, to me, Shaka is a jazz singer who happened to sing R&B for me because you don't necessarily sing in a way that's always going to be the same and always going to be, this linear R&B style. She just does Shaka.
I think of her, and you may not know this, I think of Shirley Brown, who was with Stack Records, who made that song, A Woman's a Woman. I'm saying the name wrong, but she had an angelic voice similar to Aretha Franklin, actually. Shirley Brown, she's a ballad. But my point is, I think she could sing jazz songs.
And Aretha did, right? Yeah, she basically did all of it.
Shirley Brown was bad, y'all. Look her up. Look her up.
So you got
Woman to Woman was the song.
Okay, I know you're talking
Woman
about.
to Woman.
So you talk about your favorite styles, favorite artists. You got any favorite art? So let's do it like we've done it before. You got foundational, contemporaries, and then anybody who's new on the scene. Anybody that stands out for you?
New? Not well.
Let's go foundational.
Let's go.
Your favorite foundational.
Okay, first. So let me go foundational here. And so trumpet players, the bebop style, Dizzy Gillespie. I knew of him because my dad had a couple albums with him, and he had those big old jaws. And so, when he blow, his jaws would come out, and that just intrigued me. I said, why is his jaws like that? Let me go listen to that. So I was a kind of little quirky kid when it came to stuff like that. So I would say Dizzy, Miles is foundational. More contemporary because I, grew up listening to the Marcellus brothers. I mentioned that before. So Wynton Marsalis and Branford and his brothers, and you had the Baptiste brothers there as well. John Baptiste, actually John Baptiste's dad was a friend of my mom. He taught in the system. And
so was the dad contemporary singer? Because John Baptiste he's not that old, right?
No, he's not. Yeah, but his dad was a New Orleans great, like the Neville brothers and Whitney. But he was more. They were more New Orleans style traditional music. But remember I said I was a drummer?
Yep.
So at Pilgrim's Rest Baptist Church #2 in New Orleans, he came out there and taught me how to play a little bit. He came out there and taught me a couple of times just out of favor to the friend, but I don't know John. He doesn't know me. They wouldn't know me from Adam, but that's just a little nugget right there. Roy Hargrove, rest in peace with him. He's probably I don't want to say favorite, but he's right up there, man, with his ability to play real fast and clear. And I like that that airy horn, clear, crisp sound. And he really had that.
I'll let you finish your list, but
no, go ahead.
Where Hargrove
You
is
can say
right
something
there with Miles Davis for me.
Yeah.
He's one of my favorites.
Yeah.
If something by Roy Hargrove came out, I'm going to get it. So these are cats who were mentored well, and they call them the Young Lions for a reason. These cats were really doing their thing.
Yeah.
I think I like Branford more than I like Wynton Marsalis. I think Branford was a little bit more non-traditional. I think he just tried a little different things a little bit more than Wynton. I would add to that, and they're still along the lines of the contemporaries. No, not better. Yeah. But I just liked them better.
Okay.
Esperanza Spalding, Robert Glasper. I did like Joshua Redmond back in the day when he was out, but he just, for whatever reason, he stopped. I just don't hear of him as much anymore as some of the others. Foundational though, it's real easy. John Coltrane, Miles Davis, Herbie Hancock. I like Wes Montgomery a lot. Love vocalist Abby Lincoln. And one of my favorite saxophone players is Gary Bartz. Just whatever the dude put out, I'm listening to it.
Yeah.
But those are kind of my foundational, and then a few of my contemporaries.
I want to give a shout out to, you remember Herb Albert? And he had that song. Was it with Janet Jackson? I can't remember who he had the song.
Diamonds was one of them. Then there was the slow one.
Yeah.
That he had with her too.
But the point is that he brought some attention to jazz, and he brought attention to that trumpet as well when those songs came out, and I believe they were top 40 hits. That Diamond Girl's Best Friend for sure. Yeah. And so who else? I think I mentioned King Oliver, but he's more traditionalist, and man, people like that, people need to know that actually influenced and was a mentor to Louis Armstrong. I think that's just amazing. Kenny Dorham, I don't know if you mentioned him. He was in the bebop, hard bop era, 1940s, all the way to the 1970s. Just an amazing trumpet player that, man, you just turn the lights off, man, and just play that. That's one you want to be in a house by yourself and just play throughout the house. Like some people do with classical music. That's what you do with that cat right there. And then Art Farmer, did you mention him? I can't remember if you did or not. He was in the cool jazz area as well. Very, very good trumpet player.
So just a couple other from that era. Lionel Hampton. One of my favorites, and I don't know necessarily where to fit him in.
What's that?
Trumpet player though, Donald Byrd.
Yeah.
And not just the stuff that he was doing on his own, but he started doing the jazz funk stuff, thinking like dominoes and all that kind of stuff. He did the Blackbirds, and then you got that R&B feel. Yeah. They were students of his, I guess, at Howard or something like that. But Donald Byrd is one of my favorites.
Well, if we could stay with him for a second, because I think I mentioned earlier, no one went through the stages like Miles did, but he did. He was, from the 50s all the way to the 2000s. So he started with that cool, and then to the fusion, and then after that to some of the contemporary.
Yeah.
And so he's a bad boy. You're right. That name should be known out there, Donald Byrd. I agree with you. And Terrence Blanchard, I think I said his name a couple of times. Man, that dude.
He's one of my favorites. Another New Orleans guy that I really like, who started off with the trumpet, now has transitioned to keyboard and piano. Nicholas Payton. Really liked him a lot.
Yep.
And he falls into that Young Lions camp too of that time frame.
Yeah.
Now, as far as newer jazz is concerned, a newer artist, I'd say like that came out in the last 10 years, and the scene in the UK is crazy. I mean, they're doing a lot of stuff that's similar to what I would consider the heyday of spiritual jazz, cool jazz, and bop and all that kind of stuff. I think her name is Nubia Garcia, Shabaka Hutchinson. Man, it's so many of them that I'm not going to even try to name all.
Right.
But the UK jazz scene is something else. But vocalists really love Jasmine Horn. She's phenomenal with her scatting. Samara Joy, another vocalist. Oh man, one of the smoothest cats around. Gregory Porter, vocalist, period.
Yep.
And then Kamasi Washington, I have to mention him because I think he kind of brought spiritual jazz back into resurgence. There's a newer guy by the name of Isaiah Collier, who I like a lot too, who's out of Chicago. And the last is a harpist. Now, there's some harpists that I've listened to, but one named Brandy Younger is a new one that I like now.
So when you say harp, you make me think of the xylophone. The first who come to mind is Roy Ayers.
Oh yeah.
You know, with what was that song? That doom doo doo, Sunshine.
Yep.
Yeah, everybody loved the Sunshine and how he bridged that over as well. But
Now,
the way go ahead.
I was just gonna say he was a true straight ahead jazz guy back in the 60s and 70s. Man, I can't remember who he played with, like Herbie Mann and a whole bunch of other guys, but he was a straight ahead jazz guy.
He was a jazz guy
when he started off his career and transitioned into some of the jazz, funk, and R&B type stuff.
He did a Tiny Desk too.
Ooh, did he?
Yeah, you gotta look that up. It's
I gotta check that out.
Man, and that Sunshine is still a song that I appreciate to this day, you know? So let me ask you a couple questions here. So like when we talk R&B, you know, I was like, you know, are we losing it? Is it going away? I think the question is no. I think it enhances, it changes, it pivots, so to speak. But are we losing, or do we have the capability of losing jazz music going to the future from the traditionalists that we're used to hearing?
I'd say yes and no. Yes, in terms of, you know, jazz is now incorporating a lot of different musical styles, influences, instruments. And you have full jazz compositions that are basically done by one person.
Right.
And I think that kind of takes away from the spirit of jazz in terms of it being that conversation like I talked about before. I almost feel like you need to have other players to vibe off of in order to really pull it off to my liking. But that doesn't say that these compositions, and one of the artists that I think of, I mean, shoot, what's the guy from Outkast? Andre 3000. You can consider that album that he did, that instrumental album he did, as a form of jazz.
I haven't listened to it.
You know, it's ambient music, but it's a form of jazz.
You checked it out?
Some of it, but there are other artists who do similar things that I like more than I like that particular album. But there's one lady, Nyla Senefro, that I like, who pretty much does her own thing. Pharoah Sanders, before he passed away, had released an album with an orchestra and this electronic artist it was a good blend of both electronic sounds, but him also playing over the top of it. And it's a beautiful piece, and it's a very long piece. It's one of those things where you just put it on and just let it play. And it'll just take you to different places, man. It's a beautiful piece.
Okay.
But I do think that I don't think it's going away anytime soon. People can find ways to continue to collaborate. That's only going to make it better.
I don't know, man. I like to call it what it is. I think that, unfortunately, I think we are losing it. I think people pretend that they like jazz and really don't, because it's cool to say, you know, I listen to jazz, but they really don't. And so I think we have less of the purists that really listen to that music or go seek it out. And so my next question is, and that forced, you know.
But before you get to the next question, think about the Kamasi Washingtons. Think about your guy from New Orleans, Christian Scott. He changed his name, Christian Scott, I think, out of Atunde.
Yeah.
Young trumpet player. They're pushing things along to a brand new audience. And you know, they're incorporating their sounds into hip hop into other places. So they're making. I mean, but just by the fact that he played on Kendrick Lamar's album alone, Kamasi got to follow him from that.
But that's the point I'm trying to make, is that to survive and be heard, they're having to merge into the hip hop genre to get that, I guess, exposure, so to speak. And so that, you know, then the next question is jazz having to cross over too much just to get a voice to bring people back? And is it just like taken away from the purity of it? Or am I just old school and I got to get with the times and, hey, things are changing? That could be a part of it as well. But I just think jazz is so unique in that improvisational word we can't take out of it to it being just a part of a system feature into a song that has to play to a certain cadence or what have you. That's not jazz to me. That's just an instrument playing on a hip hop song. And so that's what scares me. I don't want it to become that.
So there are a couple of other artists that I can think of, and I'm gonna look on my phone so I can find one, but it's a young guy by the name of Masego, Masego. He's a saxophone player, but he plays jazz, but he also plays in an R&B context. So he'll have a song like an R&B song where he's singing, then he'll just, you know, step out and play a few things with the saxophone. He's one, and there's another guy, Brandon Cook, I think is the young man's name. Very similar. So they can play contemporary sounding music, but they're incorporating jazz. And when you listen to the album, there'll be parts and full pieces that are just straight ahead jazz.
Okay, I'm about to give him a chance because I know we mentioned Roy, but I thought he was able to do it really well because he did incorporate some modern sound in it. It was still pure jazz.
So listen to those two guys. Right. I think they're gonna be Roy Ayers' children, if you will, because they got pieces that you can play on the radio and then pieces that are straight up jazz. And there's other guys out there that are like that, but and that's why I'm saying I don't think that it's going anywhere anytime soon. I think it'll find its footing. It'll find people who really want to sit and listen to music, and it'll just continue to be, you know, continue to go on.
Yeah, I hope you're right. I do think it will pivot a little bit and, you know, change or what have you. But thank God we have the old, library of jazz music we can go back to and listen to that cool stage.
There's a lot of good stuff out there that I still haven't found too. So yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
So that's it. Talking all that jazz today on Connoisseurs and Conversations. We would love to hear your thoughts on jazz, what jazz is. If you're a smooth jazz fan, no disrespect, but tell us your favorite jazz artists, even some of your favorite jazz songs, and tell us if you think that jazz is one of those things that'll continue to grow and go forward, or as somebody said years ago, jazz is dead. I don't think that it is, but I think it's going and it'll be around for a while. But until then, this is Connoisseurs and Conversations, and we out.
For sure.
Peace.